Hi, I'm Kara Golden, and I'm the founder and CEO of Hint, and I'm very excited to be chatting with you not only about building Hint, but also about my new book, Undaunted. Very, very excited at the Startup of the Year Summit. So very excited to know that you're going to come and listen and have a great time. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Lo Tony, the founder and managing partner of Plexo Capital. I'm looking forward to sharing with you what I look for when investing in both startups and venture funds through Plexo Capital at the Startup of the Year Summit. Hope that everyone can join us.
Hello and happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Recapped with Established. I'm Rich Maloy with VP of Engagement with Established. And each week we hold office hours for startups in the Startup of the Year network. And office hours are private, so the founders are comfortable sharing what's top of mind for them. But then we get together at the end of the week to talk about what's on founders' minds and share the advice that we offered to the startups with you, the viewer. And if you'd like to meet our mentors and other folks from the Startup of the Year community, well, you can. And I completely lost my train of thought. Thank you. Hi. So you can meet them at our annual summit. And so our annual summit is coming up just in 10 days. November 16th to the 18th. We have pitches from 50 startups. We have talks from founders such as Mike Evans from Grubhub, Kara Golden from Hintwater, who you saw there, and investors such as Tim Draper and Lo Tony, who you saw there. So join us at the Startup of the Year Summit for 2020. And I'll put that link in the chat right there. And thank you all for being here today and for checking us out later on if you're watching the replay of this. And joining me today at Recapped is Oralia Alvarez, Director of Business Development at Founders First Capital Partners. Hi, Oralia.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it is awesome to have you here. And boy, we have so much great stuff to talk about. It's interesting that your title is the Director of Business Development because just earlier this week, I was all excited. And I ran down the stairs in the morning and said to my wife, okay, I got a big important call. I've got to go win this deal. And she's like, oh, right. Who's the client? Right. Cause I've got two hats that I wear, right? So one is the business development hat for Established and the other is the investor hat for both Established and Springtime. And I was like, no, it's not a client. I have to convince this startup to let us invest in them. That's a great thing, right? For startups to have a competitive process for their round, right? But I mean, it's just an interesting thing. And so I feel like it's fitting that your title is Director of Business Development. So tell me about that.
Yeah. I'll share about my role as business development in a second. But I thought what you just mentioned to me is very interesting because I can definitely relate. As an angel investor myself, as well as being part of Founders First, I was having this conversation with an investor not too long ago about it's actually a challenge to sell money. So even as an investor myself, sometimes I have to tell founders, especially those founders that I'm very passionate about. I'm like, oh my gosh, I see myself working with them long term. I want to take them under my wing and give them the best advice possible so they can actually scale and make that impact and really make a difference in the world. But it's more about like, okay, how is my capital really going to be able to add value and take them to the next stage? So yes, I think it's a good challenge to have because it just speaks volumes of the amazing founders that are out there. And then with my role as business development, I'm very fortunate to be part of the team over at Founders First Capital Partners. And so we are a impact-focused venture fund. We are a national platform, and we provide minimally dilutive RBF funding. And so my specific role is really to build out partnerships with whether that means other potential investors into our fund, number one, or secondly, also be able to collaborate and get to know other founders to see who we could potentially invest in short-term or long-term. So I feel myself like I'm very lucky because I get to meet some of the best and brightest minds that our country has.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's the best way to describe it.
That's awesome, and it's got to be fun. Sure, certainly keeping you busy, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about RBF. Right, so revenue-based financing. Let's unpack that because this is something that I love and I tell founders about all the time. And so I'll let you do the explaining since you're the expert here.
Okay, I'll pretend to be the expert.
Okay.
So revenue-based financing, I'll give you the formal definition. So the formal definition of RBF, it is a hybrid between bank debt and VC funding. So RBF can be non-dilutive, but at the same time, it can also be minimally dilutive depending on the lender that you're taking it from. And it's a type of capital in which investors do lend you a specific amount of money in return for a percentage of your company's revenues, and to eventually the loan along with the repayment cap has been paid off. But if you ask me, Oralia, what's your definition of RBF? The way I explain it to founders, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a powerful way really to be able to finance your company growth, because it's capital intended to fuel your growth without really giving away too much of your company ownership, really.
Yep, absolutely. And the other piece that's more subtle, right, is the alignment of interests, right? And and there's been a lot written about this, about where VC interest in companies and founder and owner and employee interest in companies can diverge, right? And specifically about well, I always tell people that venture capital is a treadmill, and it only gets faster and it only gets steeper, because the expectation is you raise now, you raise more, you raise more, you raise more, you sell to somebody eventually for more than you raised cumulatively, and so the challenge there is growth at any cost, and that is very fitting for some industries and for some businesses, and is absolute poison for others. And everything in between, right? So it's not just two extremes, right? But what I love about revenue-based financing is that alignment, right? Where this is growth capital that's focused on growth, and it's showing that you can take $1 and turn it into $3 or to $5. And the way that you pay that back is you pay it back out of those future $5 or $3 or whatever it is, right? And
exactly,
I love that alignment.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So RBF it's inherent, it's the model, the model that's that the way that its structure is, it has an interest on your revenues.
Yeah.
So when you say it's definitely value aligned, the investor is always going to put your revenues ahead of everything else, because the RBF investor will never make money on a liquidity or any type of exit event. That's not how they make money.
Right.
They're going to be making money when you increase your top line revenue. So from the very beginning, they're trying to really add value, whether that means like helping you with business development if necessary. That means making it strategic introductions to really help you scale that business. Because when you're doing that, when you're growing that top line revenue, that's actually how they're making the money. So they're not saying, hey, I'm going to wait for that exit. Actually, we don't even want an exit anytime soon. When you grow your revenue.
Yeah, right. And then, I really want to drive this home, because I think it's such an important piece of the funding structure, and because I'm a believer in entrepreneurship as a great way to for America to lift itself up by its bootstraps for no matter where you are, right? And what I think is great about revenue-based financing is that it's a fit for many types of businesses. So it could be a service business, it could be a hybrid SaaS tech and service business. It could be a pure SaaS business, right? There's all across the spectrum. RBI, revenue-based investing, RBF, revenue-based financing, interchangeable. But that makes sense across the board, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Like, you look at investments all across.
Exactly. It's interesting because historically, venture debt has actually been made available to businesses that had already raised VC money before.
Yeah.
The last 5 years, the landscape as far as like fundraising has definitely changed a lot. And I think the whole innovation in capital and the way that investors are thinking differently, really focusing more on the unit of economics, the importance of sustainability and profitability has allowed the RBF landscape to really expand. But more RBF venues are being offered to founders. So it doesn't matter, like I would say, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. But the top things that RBF investors are definitely looking for, and where founders can actually benefit and say, hey, this type of capital is going to allow me to take it to the next level, is you do need to have some type of predictability in your revenue, because it is growth capital. It would be irresponsible for an RBF investor to write a check maybe to someone that's still at the pre-revenue stage. Maybe it wouldn't make sense just yet, right? But everything else that you said, you hit the nail, right on the head. And I'll touch on that point when you mentioned the whole thing with bootstrapping. I think it's very interesting when you look at the Inc. 5000 list. 93% of those companies there have actually never even taken $1 in VC funding.
Wow,
so
I didn't know that.
In itself speaks volumes of, don't get so caught up in this whole thing about, VC is the only way to raise money.
Right.
If you look at all the startups, only 0.5% have actually raised VC funding. Yep. But unfortunately, not many people know that, right? But I think that's so important to always have in context and then background as you're exploring other options for funding.
Love it. Totally. And so while we're still on this topic, and then we can move to some other things, but I do want to put the spotlight on Founders First Capital Partners, an amazing organization, and you invest at multiple levels. Is that right? And so you have two different levels that you're looking at businesses.
Yeah. So with Founders First Capital Partners, we're very fortunate as a team to have closed a $100 million commitment facility just last year. So it's still relatively new.
I remember reading about that.
It was exciting. We did pop a bottle, by the way. And so we do invest in small businesses. They can be anywhere in the U.S. As long as they do have a B2B model, they're service-based. And the reason we really are focusing on service-based businesses is because they tend to be overlooked by maybe other more traditional institutions. But it's interesting because when we actually come in as a growth partner, not only do we actually inject them with some cash capital, but most importantly is that we do offer them advisory support moving forward. So when people hear this amazing success stories of how those companies are scaling from $1 to $10 million, it's because we've been able to provide that advisory support. It's, that's the magic, I guess.
So critical.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great segue into your advisory support to startups. And so what has been top of mind for startups lately?
I would say definitely, again, it's not easy to say, well, we're not in a pandemic, because we are. I think everything has definitely been revolved around that. Like, how do I retain my customers more than anything? How is it that I retain my customers, given that a lot of them maybe don't necessarily are in need of my services right now, because everyone really is trying to cut a cost and be very lean, right? So one of the things, I don't pretend to know at all, but I tell founders that that's actually a perfect point or a perfect way for you to really understand, okay, well, maybe my service or the product that I'm currently offering might not necessarily be a need, an urgent need for my customer. It does present itself as an opportunity to understand, what are your evolving needs? How can I serve you, right? And maybe that could give you kind of that impetus or that idea to try. Maybe that could serve as an impetus to start pivoting, or at least try to test of what else could I be offering given the pandemic. It might not necessarily mean that you're doing a long-term pivot, but something in the meantime. And that's really how you're able to retain those customers, or at least if they still decide to leave or not continue on with your service or your product, being able to give that good impression, being able to build that long-term loyalty. Maybe when, once we're out of this pandemic, they will be more prompt, more likely to return back to you at that point, you know?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. No, that is a really great point, because that if you took a huge, hit on the chin as far as churn and new customer growth goes very early on. I think everybody was in a state of shock in, March and April, but then if things hadn't been turning around for you by May, then you really do have to, that's when those startup skills have really got to kick in. I send people to the lean canvas all the time. I like it better than the business model canvas. So I send people to lean canvas and say, just make some canvases. It's completely free. It's a great site to be able to map out customers and pains and gains and what problems are you solving, and think through all of these things and come up with a number of different things. And to, again, you're a startup, you've got to be nimble. If you can't be nimble as a startup, then you're in the wrong business.
Exactly. And it reminds me, one of our alumni companies, she's phenomenal. So she has a company where they actually teach etiquette, just, business etiquette, social etiquette. And you would think, oh my gosh, that company might not do the best given a pandemic, because who needs etiquette skills? But surprisingly enough, again, because when you have that growth mindset, when you have those skills, that hunger as an entrepreneur to say, okay, I need to really take an understanding of the macro trends that are going on right now, and really understand, how do I interpret that within my region and the people that I'm serving? She's been able to pivot, and surprisingly enough, she's actually in high demand, because people are trying to say, hey, what's the etiquette? How do I navigate this whole thing with proper etiquette given the COVID-19? So she has received so much national attention. She's been like on Dr. Oz, the doctors, all this amazing media coverage, and she's actually experiencing an explosive growth for her current company right now.
I love it.
Being able to have that, anticipating what are gonna be the needs of the market that I serve. Yeah. It's not gonna be easy, but if you allow yourself to be open to those type of learning experiences, you do learn the lesson, and that's really when you start able to accommodate to what the market is asking from you as a founder.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah. No.
I love it. So
people are not asking for etiquette advice on how do I dress, but they're asking, hey, how do I navigate the whole workforce when we go back to the office?
Yeah. So what's the answer? Do you wave bye at the end of a Zoom call or not?
She says, she says that you can do this, or you can, it doesn't matter. Like,
doesn't matter. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm one of those people that actually do take her etiquette advice very seriously. And it's funny because one time I actually had a call with her, and I was running a little bit behind schedule. I'm like, how do I apologize when I'm like 1 or 2 minutes late to a call? But yeah. I digress.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Look, at Establish, we are 100% virtual. We've been virtual since day one. There's actually, of our co-founders and co-CEOs, Frank and Jen, there was an article in like 2014 or something about them being digital nomads and having assembled this remote team and being, so really on the forefront of that. But it's a skill that you still have to continue to work at. Good communication. Sarcasm has to be either non-existent or very clearly marked as like, just kidding, or maybe just don't do it at all. And when things do arise, you have to reach through the Slack, right? And say, hey, can we talk? And have good communication skills along those lines to be able to be open and be willing to, and be vulnerable, like, this is, Rich, you said this, and this is how I felt about it. And it's like, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for telling me. I'm sorry to hear that. And let's clear the air.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. I love it. So that's a great example of a good pivot.
Exactly.
So, another thing that I know is top of mind for you and for other startups, right, is about, kind of building on that is, building and creating relationships with investors, right? And so you're out talking with businesses, startups, service businesses, all of the above, all the time, early stage businesses. I do the same thing. Tell me about the advice that you give to startups when it comes to building and maintaining relationships, before you need them, if you will.
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought this up, because to me, I feel very lucky because I get to speak with so many founders. I get to meet with so many people across the country. And again, I love it that there's so many people that are so passionate about the work that they're doing, right?
Yeah.
I wish I had the bandwidth and I wish I had all the capital in the world so I could say, hey, you're doing amazing. Let me write you this check and here, take it and run with it. But
Totally.
Not like that. So really the importance about relationships, even if a founder is not in the stage of per se raising capital just yet, it may be 1 or 2 years from now, it's important to start building those relationships with investors that you think might be interested in the work that you're doing, or investors that really align with the work that you're doing, or could potentially serve as advocates for you. But when you approach investors, I tell founders, like, really connect. They're humans. They're humans at the end of the day. They're not just because they're investors that they have this title and doesn't make them extra special. I'm an investor. I'm not extra special. It just means that I want to put my capital to good use, right?
Yeah.
It's very important that you connect with investors. Be very authentic. Share with them, like, what are your hopes, your dreams. I think connect with them at that human level, but most importantly, keep them updated as far as, like, where is my business right now? Maybe, I don't know, if they welcome the opportunity, 3 to 6 months, send them some kind of a investor update. I'm a sucker, I actually read those type of updates. Like, I'm really curious to know, how is it that they're growing? What has happened since the last time we connected? Especially if you're a founder that's running something dealing with, like, animals. That's my background because I'm an avid animal lover, or anything in sustainability. I really want to write you a check, but first, before I write you that check, I want to make sure that you've been doing the work since the last time we worked, right?
Yeah.
I think just, again, building that relationship, keeping people in tune of how you're growing as a person, as a business owner, is very important. Because even though that investor might not necessarily even write a check for you at the end of the day, the investor was very, very, very small. Everyone shares notes with each other. Everyone communicates with each other. So maybe if I come across an opportunity, I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember Maria shared with me that they were looking for this. If I've known them, if I build that relationship with them for the past 4 to 6 months, I'm going to be more, I'll have a higher propensity to make that introduction because I still feel comfortable to vouch for them. So I say, start relationship with investors, even if you're not raising capital just yet.
That's actually, that last piece I think is a great point too, where it's even if you're not going to make an investment, you as an investor, me as an investor, even if we're not going to make an investment, the fact that we may be able to make a connection for that founder and is critical, because now you're not somebody out of the blue. We've had a few conversations, and I can say, look, I met Maria at this event, and I've been following her updates. And whether or not I'm going to invest is, she asked for an introduction to you, and I think this might be a fit for you for those reasons. Here's her information, right? But if we don't have that relationship, you come cold, and we have, and we have one meeting, and I have no additional data points. Maybe I make that connection. Maybe I don't even offer that connection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I remember there's this one of my dear friends. I love what he says. He says it's we are in the business of saying no. We have to say no times, but it's how you say that no can be very powerful. Maybe right now it's not the right time, but let's go ahead and revisit this conversation, or let's kind of touch up in the next 4, 6, or 8 months, whatever that looks like, right? So it's how you say that no really matters.
And for the founders out there, I always share my grandma's advice, which was, you never know unless you ask. Exactly.
Yeah.
She was a very smart woman, and and that was her thing. And whether it was like, for an extra scoop of ice cream at, on her pie, for dessert, or for a job, or for whatever, you never know unless you ask.
Exactly. Yeah.
She was also a lead-foot driver who used her white hair to merge at the front of every line. And so whenever there was like crazy traffic, she would just zoom to the front of it and roll down her window and stick her head out and smile. She's like, they always let me in because I have white hair. I look like a nice old lady.
That's funny. It reminds me, when I was an undergrad, I had a really good mentor that used to say, don't be shy. At the end of the day, ask, but ask with courtesy, with respect, so on. Make sure you do put all the work ahead of the game before you're ready to make for that ask.
Yeah.
But also don't be too shy to ask, because shy can be expensive as well.
Yes. Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's your job, right? Is business development. You have to be out there asking.
Yeah, exactly. But I have a fun ask, because I get to ask people, hey, can we invest in you? So that's
right.
It's I actually have if I always think to myself, and again, I'm an avid animal lover, so if I mention animals or dogs too much, it's just because that's me.
You're good. You're good.
I think to myself, if I can kind of negotiate with my dog, I kind of feel like negotiating with the humans is kind of easier, because it's like if I'm trying to negotiate with my dog who can't even speak human, and I can still kind of get through him once in a while, I'm going to be okay when I'm speaking with humans.
What have you learned negotiating with your dog?
Yeah, he doesn't really understand no or leave it. And no meaning when he's asking for more treats than necessary. Leave it because he's getting into things that he shouldn't be getting into. But at the end of the day, I'm reminded to kind of just chill and take it easy. Honestly, during this whole pandemic thing, and it's stressful. It's stressful for everyone. Regardless of where you're at, regardless of the different types of networks or amazing colleagues or amazing families that we have in place to support us, it's still very stressful. But at the end of the day, I'm just reminded if my dog doesn't stress, we kind of, that's another lesson, I think, for me, or just for anyone in general. At the end of the day, it's going to be okay. If it's not okay, it's not the end. You know that?
I like that. At the end of the day, it's going to be okay. And if it's not okay, it's not the end.
It's not the end. But you know who it's from, right?
No.
It's what's it called? Rock and roll. It's from a rock and roll song, by the way. But I'm blanking out on his name. But he's amazing.
Okay.
I love him. Yeah.
All right.
But not my wise words. It's someone else's.
I would have attributed it to you. So.
Yeah.
It's all good. I love it. Lessons from the dogs. Lessons from our 4-pod friends.
And I'll share. I'll go a little bit off tangent, but I'll share this because I think it's important. So a few months ago, unfortunately, my one of my rescue dogs passed away. But before she had passed away, the last 4 years of her life, she actually happens to be one of the first dogs in the entire country to have gone through extensive stem cell therapy.
Wow.
And very interesting journey, because going through that forward journey with her, that's actually how I kind of became a little bit of an expert in regenerative medicine. And so last year, as an investor, I got to invest in a regenerative medicine startup. But people thought I was an expert in that, but I was not. The only reason I knew enough about it is because going through this four-year journey with my rescue dog, Charlie, I learned the whole everything that went behind that. I understood the whole approval that's needed, by the way, when you're going into that type of therapies, alternative therapies. So who would have thought, right, that I would learn so much going through this extensive journey with this dog? But yeah, I'm telling you, it really do teach us a lesson.
So I'm going to reveal my ignorance about this process, but does our dog, treating dogs with stem cell therapy, is that part of an FDA process to eventually treat humans? Where are we in that stage? How does that all tie together? Does it tie together?
Yes.
Okay.
It's interesting because a lot of the therapies that are being developed right now for dogs, some of it is actually being borrowed from ALS research and from ALS therapies. But everything that's being developed for degenerative myelopathy, DM for dogs, eventually will be used to some extent for humans as well.
Wow.
But I think this is very important to disclose, though. As dogs are going through this whole DM process, they're not being there's no cruelty, by the way. Everything's being done very ethical, very responsible.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't have done it if it wasn't, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you did it for a dog that you love, so.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's a beautiful thing, because if you think about it, it really does have a lot of potential for human medicine.
Yeah.
So I think it's in Tijuana, which is Mexico, they're actually way ahead, 20 years ahead of us, by the way. They have have a really a good strong grasp on this type of medicines. They're just like ages ahead of us. So I think that would be another really interesting kind of market to keep an eye out.
Interesting.
Moving forward.
Yeah, very interesting.
And they don't need as much regulations. They don't have as much regulations. They don't need many approvals like we do here in the U.S.
Right. Pluses and minuses, right? We're learning that as well with, as we search frantically for a COVID vaccine of where do you relax regulations for for the sake of lives, in the near term, where do you keep them stringent for the sake of lives in the long term? It's hard. I'm glad I'm not making those decisions. They're very hard decisions.
I know. Yeah.
But on the regenerative medicine front, NASA is actually working and very heavily invested in, or rather, maybe not invested is not the right term, but very heavily focused on regenerative medicine. The plan is to launch, a spacecraft, a manned spacecraft to Mars in 2033, I think, 2032, 2033. And, it's 9 months there. And then I think a year of orbit and then 9 months back. Everything that they have, that they take with them is what they will have for 3 years. So how do you, so they're thinking very far in advance of how do we treat, how do we manage, how do we monitor, how do we stay healthy? As the fellow that is one of the people heading up, finding out kind of at the tip of the spear, finding companies that are in this. He says, my client are 4 astronauts 13 years in the future.
Interesting. That's awesome. Yeah, but when we think about it, 13 years is not that far ahead, because it's like time flies by so fast.
True.
Right? Like, so they're definitely very audacious.
Very audacious. Yeah.
To me, it's impressive. I'm having a hard time even deciding what I'm going to do in the next 2 weeks. So I can only imagine like 13 years from now, so.
Totally. Well, this has been awesome. I would love to I would love to ask you, what's the single most common piece of advice that you give to founders over and over again, that if you could send them, here to hear you say this one thing, what would it be?
My number one advice is if you really want it, try to always have a definition of, do you want this, yes or no, regardless of what that means for you, right? Like if you really, really want to go after your dreams, so if you really, really want to go after building out this company, like don't let anything or anyone scare you off. Like it's unbelievable. I'm very, very, very fortunate to have my right hand, who happens to be my sister. And there are times where I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like a little bit overwhelmed with everything that's going on. And she's like, if you really, really want it, there's just no excuse. There's nothing in the world that's gonna stop you from pursuing what you want to have accomplished. And I know people and founders might hear this left and right, but again, you really need to look inside of yourself and determine, if I'm having a hard time trying to convince myself that this is worth for me, it's worth the effort, it's worth the time, or whatever that means, or it's worth me making certain sacrifices to go after this, maybe that's really not what you want after all, right? Like you have to be willing to do whatever it takes to really be able to build out your company, or go after that big audacious dream that you really want to go after. Like
I love
just
that.
Can't be deterred, doesn't matter. And building a company, by the way, I know it's not easy.
So hard.
Hear this whole thing about balance. I believe balance, but there will be the first couple of years where balance unfortunately does not exist, and that's okay. It's okay. It's worth it at the end.
Yep.
Somebody's scared. You have to be willing to sacrifice sometimes to be able to accomplish those big things that you want to accomplish.
Yep. Absolutely. I love it. That's great advice. And you even have me thinking like, boy, that's do you have to dig down deep and see, am I committed to this path, and why am I committed to this path, and why does it matter? And
exactly.
Because it's hard. It's entrepreneurship is very hard. You've got to wear every hat, and nobody's handing you a paycheck every week, guaranteed. So you got to get out and earn it.
And I'll share this with you. You know, I don't share this much with many people, uh, but I think, you know, before being part of the Founders First team, my background was in real estate investments, and part of that is not only buying and holding properties, but also flipping properties. So prior to 2012, when I was with my team at that time, flipping properties, there were times where we had to travel outside of California, just part of the business. And, you know, at that time, we had to be so lean with our costs. Sometimes it meant that we were not going to be staying at hotels as a team or anything like that. Like, hey, everyone kind of is out there on their own. So there were times where we had to sleep in our cars because we were trying to save money for those next week or two.
Wow.
You know, and it's, I tell people, like, you have to make those sacrifices, even though it means like only saving $200 a week. It doesn't seem like a lot. But when you're working with very small margins, especially when you're flipping houses, those $200 a week definitely make a difference. You know? But man, when I flipped that place and I got a big fat paycheck, I was like, yeah, it was so worth it. I don't care. But yeah, you have to make those sacrifices.
Totally. Thank you for sharing that story. That's amazing. Yeah, it just goes to show the extent that if you're going to be an entrepreneur, that you have to be ready to make those choices. Because if you're not committed to that path, and sleeping in that car feels like maybe not an insult, but maybe feels denigrating. But versus, man, there's a paycheck at the end of this, and I'm going to sleep in my car, and I saved $200 by sleeping in my car.
Hey, when you're working with those small margins, they made a difference. And you know, being a woman, I don't necessarily lead in my mind, oh, I'm a woman, I have to do things a certain way. But being a woman by myself out there outside of California in areas that maybe I was not too aware of was scary sometimes.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking to myself, the universe has always been on my side. If the universe didn't think I was capable of doing this, I wouldn't be here. You know, like, to me, it was just a privilege to be able to have the capacity to buy a house and say, now it's my house, and now I have a timeline. I need to flip this. That was a privilege in a sense as well. You know,
that's wonderful. I love it.
Privilege comes with sacrifice.
Wow, that's awesome. Privilege comes with sacrifice. Well, Oralia, this has been amazing. Really enjoyed our conversation. So grateful that you could make time today.
Of course, thank you.
Yeah,
for having me.
And for the where I lost my, I'm just all over the place today. Here we go. All right, there we go. So I lost my script. Not that I need a script to say what I say at the end of every week, but our annual summit is coming up on the 16th. So in 10 days, Monday, November 16th, Tuesday the 17th. Wednesday the 18th, we're going to have amazing pitches from 50 startups. We're going to talk to founders from big name companies. We're going to talk to investors. We have a lot of great stuff happening. So please join us at summit.startupofyear.com or est.us/summit2020. Would love to have you all there. And please come and join us. And so once again, thank you, Oralia. Thank you to Founders First Capital Partners for the work that you do there and that you all do. And thanks everybody for tuning in today. I'll wave. Bye.